It's a Wednesday evening. Nothing bad happened today. Dinner is done. The apartment is quiet. You have an hour or two before bed. And for once, nothing urgent is waiting for you. The kind of evening that is supposed to feel like rest. And sitting there, inside a life that is by any reasonable measure working, something lands quietly. This is the space, the job, the apartment, the week, the weekend that will arrive and be mostly fine. This is what the life now is. Not misery, not crisis, just a low, persistent sense that the room is smaller than you thought it would be when you were still building toward it. There is a stage before this, where the outer life stays intact while the inner contact quietly thins. Where a person gets so used to performing fine that the performance starts to feel like the only available version of themselves. This essay follows that forward. Not the surface breaking, the surface holding, the stability secured. And inside that stability, the specific feeling that the walls were always closer than they looked. You built what you were supposed to build. Not in some grand, idealized sense, just the practical version. A job that pays and does not humiliate you. A place to live. A relationship, or at least a social structure that functions. Routines that carry the days across. A life that gives you a true answer when someone asks how things are going, and you say, fine. And it is fine. Which is what makes the next part so hard to explain. Because on certain Saturdays, when nothing is wrong and nothing urgent is waiting, the hours feel strangely flat. You wake up with a free day. The apartment is clean enough. The weather is acceptable. You scroll a little. Maybe go for a walk. Maybe buy coffee. Maybe come home and realize the day still feels as though it has not really begun. Not bad. Not empty in some dramatic way. Just oddly airless. Like time is passing through a structure that no longer opens. That flatness is what this essay is about. Before going further, it is worth being precise about what comfort is before it turns. Comfort is not the enemy of a good life. Properly understood, comfort is what makes one possible. You build stability so that all your energy is not spent just staying upright. The predictable apartment, the reliable income, the relationship that is not in constant crisis, and the routine that mostly works are not failures of ambition. They are legitimate achievements. They were supposed to create the conditions in which something larger could happen. The problem is what comes after. Because once stability is established, it has to be upheld. And upkeep, unlike building, is not aimed at anything new. It is aimed at continuation. The dishes need washing. The rent needs paying. The inbox refills. The relationship needs attention. The body needs feeding. The job needs showing up to. None of this is wrong. But accumulated across enough months and years, daily life stops being organized around where you are going and starts being organized around keeping what already exists in place. That shift rarely feels like a decision. It happens the way a footpath becomes a footpath, not because someone announced it, because it kept being used. The route becomes familiar. Familiar becomes efficient. Efficient becomes normal. And one day you look up and realize you are moving along the same line because it is the only line that still feels available. This is where most people reach for the wrong explanation. The first misread is burnout. It fits the outline. Something feels missing. Something feels duller than it should. But burnout is usually about depletion. Too much demand. Too much extraction. The person in this state may not be depleted in that way at all. They may have energy they do not know where to place. The problem is not that life is asking too much. It is that life is no longer asking for anything that feels like it matters. The second misread is laziness. But laziness assumes available direction and withheld effort. It assumes you know what you would move toward and are failing to move. That is not what this is. The work still gets done. The obligations are still met. The life is still being maintained. What is absent is not effort. It is the sense that the effort leads anywhere. The third misread is boredom. That one sounds plausible too. But boredom usually yields to novelty. Change the scenery. Take the trip. Break the pattern. Do something different. And maybe you have done exactly that. Maybe the weekend away helped for 48 hours. Maybe the new restaurant, the short trip, or the temporary disruption produced a flicker. And then 2 weeks later, the same flatness returned, as though it had simply been waiting for the novelty to end. The fourth misread is ingratitude. This is the one that traps people longest, because it turns a structural perception into a moral flaw. The logic goes like this. You have more than many people have: a functioning life, a stable setup, real comforts. To feel confined inside that is self-indulgent. To say that something about the life feels too small sounds like a failure of character. An inability to appreciate, a dissatisfaction that would follow you anywhere. That logic sounds reasonable. It is also wrong. What you are perceiving is not a failure to appreciate what exists. It is the accurate perception that a life can become organized primarily around its own continuation. And once that happens, it stops producing the kind of contact that used to tell you what you actually wanted. That is not ingratitude. That is observation. The mechanism is simple enough to state directly. When life contains genuine uncertainty, unstable job, temporary apartment, unclear future, unresolved decisions, you are constantly forced into contact with your own preferences. What do I want here? What is worth staying for? What would I choose if I were not just trying to hold this together? These are not pleasant questions, but they are live ones. Friction keeps asking them, and in being asked, they keep you in contact with yourself. Remove enough of that friction, build enough stability, secure enough of the structure. Those questions stop being asked, not because they were fully answered, because the conditions that required them have been resolved. The job is stable enough. The apartment is stable enough. The relationship is stable enough. The routines work well enough. So the negotiation goes quiet. Not the dramatic negotiation, the ordinary one. The constant small contact between your daily life and your actual inner preferences. Think of a Sunday evening 6 months into a new city versus a Sunday evening 4 years into a settled life. 6 months in, everything is still unsettled. The roots are unfamiliar. The social world is incomplete. You are still deciding what kind of person you are in that place. There is friction. It may be uncomfortable, but something is happening. 4 years in, the routes are memorized. The stores are known. The weekends repeat in a pattern that mostly works. The apartment has become not an arrival, but a fixed environment. And on a Sunday evening, there is a specific kind of silence. Not peace exactly, just the flatness of a life that has become so reliable it no longer generates questions. What replaces the questions is upkeep. This is also what can happen to a relationship that is not in crisis. Two people who function well together, genuine care, nothing broken. And yet at dinner, some evenings, both of you are looking at your phones more than at each other. Not out of hostility, not even out of conscious boredom, but because the relationship has been so thoroughly secured that the conversation no longer needs to go anywhere. You know how it ends. You know the other person. The closeness is real, but it has stopped producing anything new. It is maintaining what already exists. To name that as a problem feels like a betrayal, because nothing is wrong. It is working exactly as designed. That is the precise trap. The identity layer makes this even harder to say out loud. Inside a stable life, you become a particular kind of person. The reliable one. The one who has things in order. The one whose life, observed from outside, looks coherent, sustainable, built. That identity is not false. The competence is real. The reliability is real. The life really does hold. But once identity becomes organized around keeping things running, questioning the life begins to feel like questioning the self that has been built inside it. To say this feels too small is not just to question the apartment, the job, or the routine. It is to question the version of you that made it all hold together. The one other people recognize, the one you have spent years becoming. And that is why the state can continue for such a long time without producing open rupture. Because rupture usually needs evidence, and this state produces very little of it. Nothing is broken. The job is not a crisis. The apartment is not a crisis. The relationship is not a crisis. The routine is not a crisis. Each individual part, evaluated on its own, still holds. And because each part holds, the whole life continues to present itself as fine. There is no dramatic moment to point to, no single event that would justify disruption, no sharp cause that could withstand the weight of what would need to be disturbed. Just the accumulating sensation of a life that runs correctly and fits slightly wrong. That is why the state can feel so modern and so difficult to name. It does not arrive through collapse. It arrives through successful maintenance, through reasonable decisions made over time, through the slow conversion of comfort from foundation into perimeter. And that is the exact shift. Comfort was supposed to be the ground under the life, the stable base from which the life could extend outward. What happens instead, sometimes, is that comfort becomes the entire available space. Not the ground under the life, the whole life. Everything inside that space is functional, adequate, managed, safe enough. But adequate is not the same thing as alive. And a space built to protect a life can, without anything going wrong, become too narrow to feel fully inhabitable. You move through the apartment you chose, the job you chose, the routines you chose or drifted into, the relationship you chose or continued. And somewhere in that repetition, there is a specific sensation. Not desperate, not dramatic, of wearing something that used to fit and now no longer quite matches the shape you are in. Not disaster, not failure. Just a quiet misfit between the life as built and the person still living inside it. That is why this cannot be reduced to burnout, boredom, laziness, or ingratitude. Those explanations are too thin. They misdescribe the scale of the problem. The problem is not that the life is bad. The problem is that the life has become closed. And naming that does not resolve it. That matters. Because once a state like this is named clearly, there is a strong temptation to assume that clarity itself should move something. That precise language should create immediate relief. That if you can finally describe the problem accurately, you have in some sense begun to exit it. But that is not always how this works. You can understand the mechanism completely. You can see how the days narrowed. You can see how years of reasonable choices accumulated into a life that now feels smaller than it should. You can even recognize the exact places where upkeep replaced movement and continuation replaced discovery, and still go back to the same apartment, the same dinner, the same Wednesday evening with a couple of hours before bed, and nothing obviously wrong. The understanding is real. The walls remain. And what it means to understand a state without being able to shift it through understanding alone, why naming it and even talking about it may still fail to change its dimensions, is where the next essay begins.